policeman helps a bear family cross the road, what happens next leaves everyone stunned. From the moment Officer Benjamin Harrow stepped out of his patrol car on a quiet, tree-lined road in the shadow of Yellowstone National Park, he had no idea that the next few minutes would reshape his life forever. A bear cub's plaintive whimper echoed through the crisp morning air, signaling an unusual rescue that would soon inspire a community. With lights flashing, heart pounding, and adrenaline surging, Benjamin set out to do what he had sworn to: serve and protect, even the wild creatures crossing his path. Yet, nothing could have prepared him for the astonishing chain of events to come. Officer Benjamin Harrow began his day in the small, unassuming home he shared with his wife, Catherine, on the outskirts of Pinewood Falls, a modest town nestled near the western entrance to Yellowstone National Park. The morning light drifted through the curtains, casting golden beams across the kitchen table where he sipped strong coffee from a chipped mug. This mug, emblazoned with the Yellowstone Park Ranger's emblem, had been a gift from his father, a retired ranger who had spent 3 decades studying the majestic ecosystem of Wyoming and Montana. Benjamin was in his late 30s, though the last few years of policing had etched faint lines of stress around his eyes and mouth. Having grown up in a family that treasured nature, he had always sought a position that would keep him close to the wilderness. Pinewood Falls, with its towering pines and winding roads, proved to be the ideal place to serve as a policeman while remaining in touch with the untamed beauty of the national park. Every day, he was reminded that his duty extended to maintaining the fragile balance between humans and wildlife. On that particular morning, he allowed himself a moment of stillness before heading out. He watched a squirrel dart across his backyard, bounding over a fallen log and disappearing into the undergrowth. Birds chirped at scattered intervals, adding an orchestral harmony to the crisp air. Catherine, who worked at the local community center, was already gone. She had left a note on the table: "Stay safe. Love you." It was a small gesture, but it never failed to warm his heart. He grabbed his car keys, donned his patrol hat, and glanced once more at the photographs on the mantel. One of him and Catherine on their wedding day, another of him and his father standing by Yellowstone's famous Old Faithful geyser, arms slung around each other's shoulders. He felt ready. He felt calm. Outside, the morning was unusually quiet. No thick summer traffic. No honking horns. Little did he know, the serenity would be short-lived, soon replaced by the adrenaline-charged rescue that awaited him. Benjamin's patrol car was a familiar cocoon of duties and responsibilities. The metal frame bore scratches and dents from countless roadside incidents, minor collisions, elk crossing mishaps, even one extraordinary event when a deer had leaped onto the hood as he pulled away from his driveway. The radio crackled with dispatchers relaying routine calls about lost drivers, potential speeders, and the occasional wildlife report. The route to the station took him along Route 212, a scenic, tree-lined asphalt ribbon that led deeper into the national park's outskirts. Long shadows of towering pines stretched across the road, and the morning sun bathed the landscape in ethereal light. This portion of Yellowstone was brimming with life: moose, wolves, eagles, and, of course, the iconic grizzly bears. These creatures were not mere sightings but neighbors in a fragile coexistence. Benjamin often found himself patrolling this particular route, reminding tourists to stay within the speed limit and occasionally scolding them for pulling over in unsafe spots just to snap a photo of a passing moose. There was a sense of duty and pride in ensuring that both humans and animals thrived. He recalled something his father had once told him: "In these parts, you're more than a cop, you're a steward of nature." He repeated his father's words in his mind whenever he climbed into that patrol car. The notion made his job feel larger, more significant, despite the daily routine of tickets and warnings. That morning, everything felt unremarkably normal until the sound of static on his radio spiked, cutting through the still air like a jolt. He turned up the volume. "Dispatch to all units, we got a call about possible bear activity near Eastwood Pass, near mile marker 45. Proceed with caution. We've had multiple sightings of a sow and her cubs crossing the highway." Benjamin's attention sharpened. Eastwood Pass wasn't far from where he was. He keyed his mic. Officer Harrow responding. "I'm about 5 minutes out. Over." The dispatcher acknowledged. His heart quickened slightly. Bear calls weren't entirely uncommon, but they always demanded heightened alertness, especially when a mother bear was involved. He pressed the gas pedal gently, lights still off, and steered his car toward Eastwood Pass, mind racing with potential scenarios. An injured bear on the roadside, frightened cubs wandering dangerously close to traffic, or worse, speeding vehicles that could fatally collide with wildlife. No matter how prepared one might be, unpredictable was the only certainty when it came to wild animals. Within minutes, Benjamin reached the winding stretch near mile marker 45. Pine trees closed in, forming a dense wall of green on either side of the road. His gaze darted from one shadowy shape to another, looking for movement. He turned on his police lights, a gentle glow rather than full sirens, hoping the flash would alert any oncoming traffic and possibly nudge the wildlife to keep a distance. There, on the shoulder of the road, he saw them. A large female grizzly with 2 cubs huddled by the guardrail. The mother bear looked agitated, pacing back and forth, sniffing the air, and letting out low grunts as her cubs pressed close to her fur-covered flank. One cub lifted its nose to the sky, letting out what sounded like a worried squeak. The sight tugged at Benjamin's heart. He stopped his patrol car a safe distance away. Stepping out, he kept one hand near his holster but had no intention of using it. The job required caution, not aggression. He spoke softly, as if addressing a frightened child. "Easy there, easy," he whispered. Even though he knew the bear couldn't understand his words, often it was the tone that mattered. He had learned from his father that wild animals could pick up on human tension, perhaps not the specifics of language, but certainly the energy and emotion behind it. The mother bear turned her massive head toward him, eyes reflecting both weariness and stress. He noticed a subtle limp in her gait. She must have injured her paw on something, or perhaps she had a thorn embedded in her foot. With protective instincts in overdrive, any aggression from her would be purely defensive. Slowly, Benjamin stepped around to the trunk of his patrol car. He carried a specialized wildlife kit that contained flares, a noisemaker, and even a tranquilizer dart for extreme situations, but he hoped not to use it. He also carried a small container of high-protein biscuits, something that rangers sometimes used in emergency wildlife rescue scenarios. Though it was never recommended to feed wild bears under normal circumstances, food conditioning could be dangerous. This situation might call for a minimal distraction to guide the bears across the road or away from traffic. He paused, heart hammering in his chest. So many thoughts collided. Would the sow charge if he came too close? Would the cubs scatter in panic? For a moment, he caught the mother bear's gaze. In her eyes, he read fear and confusion, emotions that mirrored his own. Though they were from drastically different worlds, they shared a moment of mutual caution and understanding. The morning air was crisp and silent, broken only by the hum of Benjamin's engine and the soft whine of a breeze through the pines. Carefully, he placed a fluorescent traffic cone about 10 yards behind his car, hoping to slow any oncoming vehicles. He then pulled out a set of orange emergency flares. If cars approached, he would signal them to stop long enough for the bears to cross safely. As he inched closer to the sow, he made sure to keep a steady, calm demeanor. His father's voice echoed in his mind, "Your respect for them is your greatest armor." He stopped about 50 feet away, close enough to see every ripple in her thick fur. The bear huffed loudly, guiding her cubs behind her. Benjamin's heart clenched with empathy. Between the mother bear and the guardrail, there was a small clearing leading into a patch of forest. If they could just get across the asphalt safely and into those trees, the family would be secure from passing cars. Slowly, Benjamin pulled out one of the high-protein biscuits from its container. The mother bear sniffed the air again. He set the biscuit gently on the ground. It wasn't about feeding them a meal but offering a quick way to coax them in the right direction, away from the road. He backed away, giving them space. One of the cubs, curious, sniffed and tentatively padded forward. The mother bear grunted, but she did not stop the cub. Instead, she watched Benjamin with an unwavering gaze. Benjamin took a few more steps back, ensuring the bear had a clear path. His plan was to walk around them slowly, place another biscuit a few feet away, and gradually lead them to the other side. He knew this wasn't standard procedure. Wildlife experts generally discouraged feeding bears because it could make them approach people in the future, seeking food. But in this critical moment, the priority was saving lives, both the bears and those of any unsuspecting drivers. He could feel the tension thrumming in the air. The second cub ambled forward, nose close to the asphalt. The sow took a tentative step, still limping slightly. When all three moved a few paces along the shoulder, Benjamin circled behind them, waving his arms gently to herd them away from the center of the road. As they progressed, he placed another biscuit on the edge of the asphalt near the clearing. The cubs, bolder now, followed the scent. The mother bear let out a soft huff, paused, then lurched forward, spurred by instinct to protect and shepherd her children. In a matter of minutes, Benjamin managed to guide them off the road and onto the forested path. The relief was palpable as the bear family disappeared into the underbrush, safe from traffic, for now. Benjamin felt sweat trickling down his temples. His heart was still pounding like a steady drum. He walked back to his patrol car with trembling hands. The entire exchange had been surreal, a delicate dance of caution, empathy, and gentle persuasion. But as he moved to turn off his emergency lights, something unexpected happened. A sound cut through the hush, a soft whimper, eerily similar to the cry he'd heard before. Benjamin spun around, scanning the roadside. Had one of the cubs gotten separated? Or was there another bear? He grabbed his flashlight and shone it into the forest's edge, back toward the place where the sow and cubs had disappeared. That's when he saw it. Tucked behind a large rock was a third cub, much smaller than the other two. It was lying motionless, letting out faint cries. Panic surged in Benjamin's chest. The cub was alone, presumably injured or very weak. Perhaps it had lagged behind, lost or abandoned. He stepped closer, scanning the trees for any sign of the mother bear. If she realized her cub was missing, she might return with a vengeance. Kneeling down, he observed the small creature. Its breathing was shallow, its eyes drooped, and its fur was matted with dirt. The cub attempted to get up but collapsed with a soft whine. Something was very wrong. Benjamin had no immediate training in veterinary care for wild animals, but he couldn't just leave it to die. He reached for his radio, uncertain if he should call a wildlife rescue team first or try to find the mother bear. But fate intervened in the most astonishing way. A sudden rustle in the bushes made him jerk his head around. There stood the mother bear and her 2 cubs. They had come back. Benjamin's heart nearly stopped. This was one of the most dangerous scenarios he could find himself in, standing between a mother bear and her vulnerable cub. He froze, adrenaline washing over him like a flood. The sow's massive head swiveled, her sharp eyes locking onto her injured cub. She let out a guttural moan that reverberated in Benjamin's bones. He expected a charge at any moment. Instinct told him to move away, fast. Instead, something remarkable happened. The mother bear did not lunge or roar. She cautiously approached, her 2 cubs trailing behind. It was as if she sensed that Benjamin was not a threat. Benjamin, heart in his throat, took slow steps backward. The mother sniffed the air around her fallen cub and nudged it gently with her nose. The little one tried to move but whimpered again, too weak to stand. With tender movements that defied the bear's enormous strength, the mother gently positioned herself so that the injured cub could lean against her. Never in his life had Benjamin witnessed such a poignant display of maternal care, especially under these circumstances. Any normal mother grizzly might have attacked a human for being so close. Yet this one displayed a mixture of concern for her cub and a wary acknowledgement that Benjamin had actually been helping. Time seemed to stand still. Benjamin could scarcely believe what he was seeing. To his utter shock, the sow turned her head toward him and let out a noise that sounded almost plaintive, as though she were asking for help. Benjamin's mind spun. He had heard anecdotal stories, rare accounts of wild animals seemingly asking humans for help. He never put much stock in them. Until now. There was a moment of understanding, intangible but undeniably present. The mother bear stared at him again, then lowered her massive frame next to her injured cub. The 2 healthy cubs circled nervously, letting out soft sounds of worry. Feeling a surge of both fear and compassion, Benjamin keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Harrow at Eastwood Pass near mile marker 45. I have a situation with a wounded bear cub. The mother is non-aggressive but seems desperate. Requesting immediate wildlife rescue support. Over." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Copy that, Officer Harrow. Closest ranger unit is about 30 minutes away. Please use extreme caution. 30 minutes could be an eternity for an injured cub." Benjamin could tell it was fading. Every raspy breath the little one took sounded weaker. The mother bear's fur bristled with anxiety. She glanced back at Benjamin, and he felt a tug in his chest so strong that he momentarily forgot she was a ferocious predator capable of tearing him apart. Instead, he saw a mother fighting to save her child. Benjamin made a snap decision. He opened his trunk, rummaged through his wildlife rescue kit, and grabbed a thick blanket and a small first aid box. It wasn't designed for bears, more for domestic animals or minor injuries, but it was all he had. Also, his father's old emergency phone numbers for local vets and specialized wildlife rehab centers were tucked into the kit. He dialed the first number on his cell. An answering machine picked up. The second one connected him to Dr. Louisa Gordon, a veterinarian who occasionally worked with the park rangers. "Dr. Gordon, this is Officer Benjamin Harrow. I'm at Eastwood Pass. We have an injured bear cub, maybe a few months old, and the mother's right here, non-aggressive. The cub can barely move. What do I do until wildlife rescue arrives? Her voice was calm but urgent. Officer, you need to be extremely careful. If the mother is allowing you near, that's rare, but it can change in a heartbeat. Is there any visible wound, or do you suspect internal injuries? Benjamin glanced at the cub's body. No obvious bleeding. It's very weak, though, possibly dehydrated or maybe hit by a vehicle. I'm not sure. Try to assess if the cub has trouble breathing or any broken limbs, but if the mother is there, do not attempt a thorough examination. You risk aggravating her. Benjamin swallowed. Understood. Try offering water if you can do so safely, Dr. Gordon continued. Keep it warm, but do not force it to move. When the ranger team arrives, they'll have sedation equipment and can provide better care. In the meantime, do your best to keep the cub stable and be ready to back off quickly if the mother shows any sign of aggression. Benjamin thanked her and hung up, his heart pounding. Approaching a vulnerable wild animal next to its mother was borderline insane, yet something about the mother's demeanor made him believe he could do it. That intangible moment of communication flickered again in her eyes, as though urging him to help. He filled a small plastic container with water. Keeping his gaze gentle, he knelt down, inching toward the cub. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready to bolt if the mother lunged. The sow let out a soft huff, shifting her weight but not advancing. Benjamin set the container on the ground, just out of the cub's reach, then used the blanket to gently create a barrier between the cub and the rough ground. The cub managed a weak lick of the water before collapsing again. Time was ticking. He offered a silent prayer that the ranger unit would arrive soon. As he waited, memories surged up from Benjamin's childhood, long, lazy summers spent exploring the wilderness with his father. He recalled stumbling upon an injured fawn when he was 9 years old. His father had shown him how to remain calm, speak softly, and never corner a frightened creature. Together, they had called a local ranger, and the fawn had been rehabilitated and released a month later. That was the moment Benjamin first realized he wanted to protect life in all its forms. That commitment was what led him to become a policeman, not merely for the badge or the authority, but for the chance to serve a community that included both humans and wildlife. He wondered if his father would have been proud of him now, crouched on a deserted road next to a mother bear and her injured cub, taking a calculated risk in the name of compassion. In the distance, the hum of a vehicle approached. Benjamin tensed, scanning the bend in the road. With relief, he recognized the green and white Ranger SUV. 2 rangers stepped out, Ranger Hayes, an older man with a leathery face and sharp eyes, and Ranger Peters, a younger woman who had studied wildlife biology in college. They carried a tranquilizer gun, medical kits, and a net. "Benjamin, you okay?" Hayes called out, his voice echoing through the stillness. Benjamin nodded and beckoned them over. "The cub's in rough shape, might need immediate attention. The mother's not been aggressive, but we need to stay on guard." Together, they orchestrated a delicate rescue. Ranger Peters prepared a mild sedative dart intended for a bear cub. While a full-grown grizzly might require a more potent dose, they were careful not to overdo it for the smaller body. The mother bear watched warily, pacing in tight circles. Hayes fired the dart gently into the cub's hind leg. Within minutes, the cub's trembling grew still, and the whimpering subsided. The mother bear tensed, uncertain, but Benjamin and the rangers slowly circled around to calm her. He noticed she recognized him, or so it seemed, and while anxious, she did not charge. A wave of astonishment passed through the rescue team at this near-miraculous display of cooperation. Swiftly, Peters and Hayes worked to place the cub on a small stretcher. Once the cub was safely secured, Ranger Hayes administered basic first aid, checking for broken bones and signs of internal bleeding. "Looks like a possible fracture in the rear leg and dehydration," he murmured gravely. The cub might have been clipped by a car or gotten separated for too long, starved of nutrition. Mother Bear let out a mournful groan, pacing in agitation as the Rangers handled her baby. Benjamin stood close by, arms open in a non-threatening stance, still acting as a buffer in case she decided to charge. Yet she hovered only a few yards away, never retreating fully, never attacking. Benjamin felt tears prick his eyes. He had seen animals in distress before, but never had he felt such a strange bond. It was as though the mother bear recognized he was trying to help. The Rangers hurried, mindful that the sedative would wear off and the cub would be in pain again. "We've got to get this little one to the rehab center," Peters announced, wiping sweat from her brow. "There's a facility near Mammoth Hot Springs. Dr. Gordon is en route there now." Hayes nodded. "But what about the mother? If we take the cub, she might follow or become enraged." Benjamin looked at the mother bear. She stared at the cub on the stretcher, let out a guttural moan, then looked at Benjamin. He approached slowly, speaking in soothing tones. "We're helping your baby," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. "We're trying to save its life." In an unprecedented moment, the mother bear took a few steps forward. Benjamin's breath caught. He half expected her to attack, but she merely sniffed the air around the stretcher, then gingerly nudged the cub's limp form with her nose. The heartbreak in her gesture was unmistakable. Ranger Peters whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." Ranger Hayes added softly, "We should move now." Carefully, they lifted the stretcher. The mother bear let out a low, pained groan but didn't interfere. The two healthy cubs clung close to her legs. Benjamin worried about what would happen next. The Wildlife Rehab Center was nearly an hour away. Even in the best-case scenario, the cub would be separated from its family for days, maybe weeks, while it recovered. "We're going to try and reunite them once the cub is stable," Hayes said, reading Benjamin's thoughts. "But we can't guarantee anything." Benjamin gave a small nod, swallowing the lump in his throat. As he moved to escort the Rangers back to their vehicle, the mother bear paced behind them. When Hayes and Peters secured the cub in the SUV, the mother bear let out a series of agitated sounds, soft roars and huffs that ricocheted through the crisp air. She wanted to follow. That much was clear. All three humans exchanged troubled glances. If the mother followed the vehicle on foot, she could end up in more danger, crossing more roads, encountering more traffic, or stumbling into populated areas. Hayes sighed. "We might have to tranquilize her too, but that's a big risk." "Let's see if she backs off once we drive away," Peters suggested quietly. Benjamin couldn't shake the feeling that separating the family at this moment was somehow wrong. Yet he knew it was necessary. With heavy hearts, they carefully closed the SUV's tailgate, the injured cub tucked inside. The mother bear and her two remaining cubs stood only a few yards away, as if in silent farewell. When the engine started, the mother bear lurched forward, causing everyone's pulse to spike. But instead of charging in rage, she simply followed alongside the car, her paws scraping the asphalt. They moved slowly, sirens off, not wanting to incite further panic. The sow kept pace for a few harrowing moments, letting out distressed moans that tore at Benjamin's heart. He was reminded that animals could grieve deeply, perhaps in ways not so different from humans. Eventually, as the SUV picked up speed, the mother bear fell behind, trotting helplessly along the shoulder of the road. Benjamin stopped his patrol car, letting the rangers go ahead. He watched as the mother, flanked by her two frightened cubs, stood at the edge of the forest. She roared again, a lament that echoed over the lonely stretch of highway. The rest of Benjamin's shift was a blur. He trailed behind the Ranger SUV for a while, ensuring no other vehicles came dangerously close to the distraught mother. Eventually, she and her cubs vanished into the pines, presumably returning to a den or a safer area. But the image of her desperate pursuit stayed with him. He drove back to the station on autopilot, replaying every moment in his mind. The callousness of a speeding car that might have hit the cub, the extraordinary empathy that seemed to pass between him and the mother bear, the bear's willingness to let him near her injured young. It all felt surreal, like a dream teetering on the edge of a nightmare. At the station, he had to file an incident report. The other officers listened in disbelief when he recounted the story. Sergeant Diaz, his immediate superior, sat back in his creaking desk chair, eyebrows raised. "You're telling me the mother just allowed you to help the cub?" Benjamin nodded, exhaustion weighing on him. "Yes, she seemed to know we weren't trying to harm them." Diaz let out a low whistle. "I've been here 15 years, never heard a story like that." Benjamin shrugged, unsure how to respond. Rangers took the cub to the rehab center. "It'll be there for a while. I'd like to check on its status when I can." "You do that," Diaz replied. "I'll go over your report." "Good work, Harrow. That could have ended a lot worse." Benjamin sighed, relieved that Diaz believed him. But even as he filled out the final lines of his report, his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about that haunting cry and the heartbreak in the mother bear's eyes. In a way, it felt like a vow had been made. He had taken responsibility, and he couldn't simply walk away now. The next day, after a restless night plagued by dreams of limping bears and lonely highways, Benjamin took a personal detour to the Mammoth Hot Springs Wildlife Rehab Center. It was a modest facility but well-equipped to handle various animals found within Yellowstone's boundaries. Dr. Gordon met him at the entrance, wearing green scrubs and a reassuring smile. She led him to a fenced enclosure where the cub was being monitored. "We have him sedated and on pain meds. X-rays show a hairline fracture in the rear leg, some bruised ribs, but no internal organ damage. He's malnourished, likely from being separated from his mother for longer than we initially thought." Benjamin exhaled. "But he'll recover, right?" Dr. Gordon gave a cautious nod. "We believe so. With proper care, the fracture should heal, and we can work on improving his nutrition. Our biggest concern is the separation from the mother. Bear cubs learn survival skills from their mothers. If we can't reunite them, he might have a tougher time in the wild." "How soon before he can be released?" "If all goes well, maybe a couple of weeks. We prefer to do a soft release, where we introduce him back into the mother's territory, but that requires locating her, ensuring she still accepts him, and that she hasn't relocated or been killed." "It's complicated." Benjamin nodded. The mother was out there, wandering the forests near Eastwood Pass. He wondered if she was searching for her lost cub at that very moment, just as the cub was whimpering in sedation. A pang of guilt twisted in his stomach. He knew they had to remove the cub to save its life, but the separation felt cruel. As he turned to leave, Dr. Gordon placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for what you did," she said softly. Most officers would have just called it in and waited. "That cub owes you its life." Benjamin tried to smile but found it difficult. "I only did what anyone in my position would." He hesitated. "That mother bear, she trusted me. I can't just walk away now." Dr. Gordon nodded with understanding. "Then don't. Stay involved. We could use someone like you when it comes time for release. A familiar face might help reduce stress, though I can't promise the mother bear will remember or welcome us with open arms." "That's fair," he said, a small flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Word spread quickly through Pinewood Falls. Locals whispered about the policeman who had helped a mother bear rescue her cub. Some were impressed, others skeptical. Tourists sometimes approached Benjamin on his patrol route, asking if the story was true. Even the local news station, KPFN, ran a short segment about the incident, dubbing Benjamin the Bear Guardian. The attention made him uncomfortable. He hadn't done it for praise or accolades, and he certainly didn't feel heroic. But the story had struck a chord in a town that had always lived in close contact with wildlife. Parents with children seemed particularly touched by the mother's desperation and Benjamin's compassion. Pinewood Falls wasn't large, and soon enough, folks started raising funds for the Mammoth Hot Springs Wildlife Rehab Center. A local diner, the Pinecone Cafe, ran a promotion where a portion of every bill went to animal rescue efforts. The mayor's office announced a wildlife safety awareness program. It was as if the entire community had found new energy, a reminder that humans and wildlife shared these lands and that empathy could bridge the divide. Amid this flurry of support, Benjamin felt a strange mix of gratitude and unease. He was grateful that the cub's plight was not going unnoticed, but uneasy about how the story might overshadow the real challenges that remained, reuniting a mother and her cub in the unpredictable wilderness. A week later, Dr. Gordon called with good news. The cub, now nicknamed Lucky by the rehab staff, was healing well. If his recovery continued at this pace, he could be ready for release in another week or two. The plan would be to sedate him lightly, transport him back to his original territory, and attempt a gradual reintroduction with the mother if she was still around. Benjamin volunteered to help. Since the day of the rescue, he had driven that same stretch of road multiple times, scanning the forest edges for any glimpse of the mother bear and her two cubs. On 2 occasions, he thought he saw her in the distance, disappearing among the pines, but he couldn't be certain. Now, with a more formal plan in place, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He arranged time off with Sergeant Diaz, who gave his blessing for Benjamin to assist the rangers. This was a chance to finish what he started, to complete the circle of compassion he had begun on that fateful morning. 2 days before the scheduled release, Benjamin joined Ranger Peters on a reconnaissance drive around Eastwood Pass. They carried binoculars, cameras, and a map pinpointing known bear habitats. The forest was alive with birdsong and the rustling of small mammals. Occasionally, they'd spot deer bounding through the undergrowth. "Any sign of her?" Benjamin asked, scanning a thick cluster of bushes. Ranger Peters shook her head. "Not yet. But a local hiker reported seeing a grizzly with 2 cubs near this area last week. If that was her, hopefully, she's remained in the vicinity." They traveled deeper into the wilderness, stopping intermittently to check for bear tracks or fresh scat. At one point, they discovered paw prints in the mud near a creek, adult and juvenile footprints, possibly belonging to the sow and her cubs. It was a promising sign. As dusk approached, they set up a small observation post near a clearing that had been baited with a wildlife-friendly attractant, something that wouldn't overly habituate the bears but might entice them to pass by. They waited, the forest growing still and quiet, the air cooling rapidly under a canopy of pine. Needless hours passed with no sighting. Benjamin's legs cramped, and the shadows grew long. Just as Ranger Peter suggested they pack up, a faint rustling broke the silence. Through his binoculars, Benjamin glimpsed a large, hulking figure step into the moonlight, followed by two smaller shapes. His heart leapt. It was a grizzly and two cubs, larger than before but definitely juveniles. He recognized the slight limp in the mother's gait, the same one he had seen that day on the road. The mother bear sniffed the air, cautious yet curious. One cub trotted up to the clearing, paused, then scampered back to its mother's side. Benjamin and Ranger Peters watched in hushed awe. The family lingered for a few minutes, then slowly moved on, disappearing into the shadows like ghosts. But that was enough. They had confirmed she was still in the area. "Well," Peter said softly, lowering her binoculars, "if we bring Lucky here, there's a real chance the mother's presence might draw him back in. We have to be careful, but this is the best-case scenario." Benjamin's chest tightened with an optimism he hadn't felt in days. The mother was alive, the cubs were alive, and soon, Lucky might rejoin them. In the days leading up to the planned release, the Mammoth Hot Springs Wildlife Rehab Center became a hive of activity. Veterinarians finalized Lucky's health checkups, ensuring his fracture had healed sufficiently. A small radio collar was fitted around his neck, designed for short-term monitoring. The plan was to track him from a distance to see if he successfully reunited with the mother or if further intervention was necessary. Benjamin spent time at the rehab center, helping Dr. Gordon coax Lucky into a transport crate. Though the cub was far from tame, he had grown somewhat accustomed to human presence. An unfortunate but necessary side effect of rehab. The real challenge would be ensuring Lucky did not become dependent on humans. The morning of the release was crisp, with a thin veil of fog covering the roads as a convoy of two Ranger SUVs, the rehab center's van, and Benjamin's patrol car headed out to the site. They carried sedation equipment, first aid supplies, and everything else needed for a delicate operation. Benjamin rode with Dr. Gordon, who looked both excited and apprehensive. "We have to do this right," she said. "We can't force the mother to accept the cub, and we have to maintain a safe distance. If we stress either one too much, it could all go wrong." He nodded solemnly. "Understood." A wave of memories washed over him, helping the mother bear across the road, discovering Lucky behind that rock. The intense stare between him and the sow, it all led to this pivotal moment. They arrived at a secluded clearing near Eastwood Pass, close to where they had spotted the mother and her two cubs. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Ranger Hayes and Ranger Peters took positions a few hundred feet away, binoculars and tranquilizer guns at the ready, just in case. Dr. Gordon, Benjamin, and a veterinary assistant carefully unloaded Lucky's crate from the van. Inside, the cub shifted and let out a series of huffs, clearly agitated but not panicked. His leg had healed, though he still favored it slightly. Benjamin could hear his heartbeat in his own ears as Dr. Gordon unlocked the crate door. Slowly, they lifted it open, stepping back to give Lucky space. For a few seconds, the cub hesitated at the threshold. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he tumbled out and took several tentative steps onto the grass. The radio collar on his neck looked oddly out of place against his soft fur, but it was necessary for monitoring his movement. "Now we wait," Ranger Hayes called softly, motioning for everyone to stand back. They retreated to a distance of about 100 yards behind a makeshift blind of branches and camo netting. The plan was to let Lucky wander, smell the territory, and hopefully vocalize enough to attract his family if they were nearby. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Lucky paced around the clearing, sniffing trees, occasionally looking back at the humans as if uncertain of his newfound freedom. Benjamin's chest tightened every time the cub glanced in their direction. He prayed Lucky wouldn't come running toward them for food or comfort. That would mean rehab had failed to preserve his wild instincts. At last, Lucky ventured further into the forest, disappearing behind a cluster of pines. The monitoring team tracked the radio collar's signal and quietly followed at a distance, hoping to witness a miraculous reunion. Time dragged on, the forest alive with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. Just when they considered taking a break, a commotion echoed through the trees. Ranger Peters, scanning through binoculars, whispered urgently, "I see them. The sow and the two cubs are about 50 yards from Lucky's position." Benjamin's heart leapt into his throat. He squinted, trying to see through the dense foliage. Indeed, a large form shuffled in the dappled sunlight. Then, the sow let out a deep huff, and Lucky responded with a high-pitched squeal. The mother bear froze. The two healthy cubs gathered around her, uncertain. The tension was palpable, nobody dared move. Benjamin willed Lucky to approach cautiously. If the mother perceived him as an intruder or a threat, she might drive him away, or worse. Lucky let out another squeal, stepping into a patch of sunlight. The sow's ears pricked. She sniffed the air, releasing a low moan that reverberated through the trees. Suddenly, Lucky bounded forward. The mother raised herself slightly on her hind legs, a defensive posture. One of her cubs scurried behind her for protection. Benjamin braced for the worst. Then, in an incredible turn of events, the mother lowered herself and approached Lucky with measured steps. She sniffed him, circled him. Lucky cowered, huffing quietly. Then, almost imperceptibly, the mother bear licked his face. The two healthy cubs, reading their mother's acceptance, joined in, sniffing Lucky curiously. A collective exhale of relief whooshed through the hidden humans. Tears sprang to Benjamin's eyes. The mother had recognized Lucky as hers, whether by scent, memory, or some primal bond. The cub huddled into her side, and for a moment, it seemed all was forgiven and forgotten. The family nuzzled together, a portrait of reunion so tender that even the gruff Ranger Hayes looked visibly moved. Dr. Gordon nudged Benjamin gently. "We did it," she whispered. Benjamin nodded, hardly trusting himself to speak. They watched as the sow led her newly reunited trio deeper into the woods, away from the prying eyes of humans. The radio collar signal remained strong, allowing the tracking team to follow at a distance and confirm the family stayed together. For the next few days, the Rangers monitored Lucky's movements. Each reading showed him traveling with the sow and the other two cubs, gradually moving further into the wilderness. Every check-in was a victory, evidence that the mother had fully accepted him back. Word spread in Pinewood Falls once more, this time, that the cubs' release was a success. Local media praised the Rangers and the rehab center, but they reserved special mention for Officer Benjamin Harrow, whose compassion and bravery had set the entire chain of events in motion. Benjamin tried to downplay his role, insisting it was a group effort, but his humility only earned him more admiration. What lingered in his mind was the deeper mystery, the intangible connection between him and that mother bear. It felt like more than luck or happenstance the day he helped her cross the road. Something passed between them. Perhaps it was just a mother's desperation or an intuitive sense that he meant no harm. Or maybe there was a kind of language older than words, a bridge between species that only revealed itself in rare, extraordinary moments. Benjamin's father had once called it the wild communion, those fleeting sparks of mutual understanding between humans and the natural world. In the weeks that followed, Benjamin noticed subtle shifts in himself. The routine of patrolling Pinewood Falls felt newly purposeful. Every time he saw wildlife near the roads, he flashed back to that morning with the bears. He began collaborating more closely with the local ranger station, organizing community talks about safe driving practices in wildlife zones and the importance of not feeding bears. He also found himself fielding questions from colleagues and even higher-ups about the incident. Some wanted to replicate successful bear rescues, but Benjamin cautioned them that this was a rare exception. "We got lucky," he would say. "That bear let us help because she was desperate. We shouldn't assume every encounter will go this way." His words resonated, adding a layer of humility to the growing conversation about wildlife management. Rather than highlighting human triumph, Benjamin insisted on spotlighting the delicate balance of respect and caution necessary when dealing with wild animals. Catherine, his wife, watched these changes with pride. Over dinner, she would coax him to share details of his day, and he found himself opening up more than ever before. The transformation in him wasn't just professional, it was personal. The event had reaffirmed his belief in compassion, bridging fear and empathy to find a shared language of care. On a crisp autumn afternoon, weeks after Lucky's successful reunion, Benjamin decided to revisit Eastwood Pass. He took his patrol car up the winding road, but this time as a personal trip. Parking by the guardrail where he had first encountered the mother bear, he walked into the forest alone, accompanied only by the quiet hush of rustling leaves. He found the rock where Lucky had once lain, whimpering and near death. Moss now covered its surface, and the surrounding foliage had changed into hues of orange and gold. The air smelled of pine resin and fallen needles. He stood there for a long moment, letting the weight of memory settle over him. He recalled the tears in the mother bear's eyes, her uncertain acceptance of his presence, and the heartbreaking cries of the injured cub. The memory was vivid, etched permanently into his mind. Yet, reflecting on it now, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude rather than fear. They had all survived. They had defied the odds. A gentle breeze picked up, rustling the treetops, and for a fleeting instant, Benjamin imagined he heard a faint bear call in the distance. Was it real or just his mind playing tricks? He couldn't be certain, but a gentle warmth suffused him, as if the forest itself recognized his presence. He whispered a silent thank you to the mother bear for trusting him, to Lucky for fighting to live, to the rangers and Dr. Gordon for their expertise, and to the wild communion that had made that rare moment of understanding possible. The sun was setting by the time he decided to head back, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. He trudged through the undergrowth, following the faint trail he had made, stepping over fallen logs and crunchy leaves. At one point, a rabbit darted across his path, startling him. He chuckled at his jumpy nerves, still attuned to any sign of large wildlife. As twilight descended, a full moon began to rise, illuminating the forest floor in a silver glow. Something compelled him to linger just a bit longer, to see Eastwood Pass under the moonlight. He wandered until he reached a small clearing, the same one where they had released Lucky. Suddenly, he heard a rustling in the bushes. Heart pounding, he turned off his flashlight, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever creature lurked in the shadows. Out from behind a stand of trees emerged three shapes: bears. He froze, adrenaline surging through his veins. It was too dark to see details clearly, but their silhouettes were unmistakable. He stood very still, half hidden behind a large pine. The moonlight cast a faint, ethereal radiance on the clearing. One of the bears, larger than the others, raised its head, sniffing the air. The other two, smaller forms, stood close by. Benjamin's heart pounded so loudly he was sure they could hear it. For a moment, he debated retreating. A mother bear with cubs was always a dangerous scenario, but an unexplainable instinct told him to remain quiet and calm. Slowly, the sow stepped further into the clearing. She let out a low grunt, scanning the perimeter. Benjamin couldn't see her eyes clearly, but he had a strange sensation that she was looking directly at him, even though he was concealed in darkness. One of the smaller bears let out a soft huff, nuzzling the sow. Could it be Lucky? The radio collar had been programmed to release after a certain period, so it might not even be visible now. But somehow, Benjamin just knew. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The sow pivoted her head, then began guiding her cubs away, back into the safety of the forest. Before they disappeared completely, she paused, glancing over her shoulder, as if to say goodbye, or maybe just to check that no threat followed. Benjamin stood rooted in place, hardly daring to breathe. The encounter was silent, fleeting, but it carried a profound weight. Whether or not it was the same family, the moment felt like a benediction, a final chapter in a story that had begun on this very ground. Benjamin returned to his patrol car. Under the light of the moon, he felt a sense of completion, as though the forest itself had offered him closure. The drive back to Pinewood Falls was quiet, the roads empty, the night sky full of stars. He replayed the image of the three bears in his mind, gliding through the clearing, the mother pausing to acknowledge him. Perhaps. In the days that followed, Benjamin continued his work with renewed vigor. The story of the bear family found its way into local lore, shared around campfires and dinner tables. Tourists who drove through Eastwood Pass heard the tale from local guides, reminding them to slow down and remain vigilant. The rehab center received additional funding, enabling them to expand their capacity for helping injured wildlife. At the station, more officers expressed interest in wildlife training sessions, broadening the department's understanding of how to handle such encounters with greater empathy. Benjamin, for his part, avoided the spotlight as much as possible. Still, the community recognized him as a symbol of the remarkable bond that could exist between man and beast, if only we paused to see each other not as enemies, but as co-inhabitants of a shared world. He'd sometimes catch sight of news stories calling him Officer Bear. Local children even drew pictures of him alongside giant, friendly bears, posting them on the police station bulletin board. Though embarrassed by the attention, he couldn't help but smile at the innocence and possibility those drawings represented. Months later, as the first snow dusted the streets of Pinewood Falls, Benjamin found himself reflecting on the journey. He thought about the day he first stepped out of his patrol car, the bear cub's plaintive cry, the improbable trust the mother bear had shown him, and the surreal chain of events that followed. He realized that everyone in town, from the rangers to the diner owners, had played a role in this story. It wasn't just about him. It was about a community coming together to protect the vulnerable, to nurture life in all its forms. It was about stepping beyond fear, forging a connection grounded in respect, and finding hope in unexpected places. Above all, it was a testament to resilience, connection, and personal growth. Three themes that had guided Benjamin through this extraordinary chapter of his life. From that day on, whenever he patrolled Eastwood Pass, he would slow down at mile marker 45, scanning the underbrush, remembering the once-in-a-lifetime experience that proved how truly interconnected humans and wild animals could be. And though he never again encountered the mother bear or Lucky at such close range, the footprints they left behind, both on the land and on Benjamin's heart, remained forever. As the seasons changed and Pinewood Falls settled back into its quiet rhythm, Officer Benjamin Harrow carried with him the profound lessons of his encounter with the bear family. He saw that compassion could transcend boundaries, even those between man and beast, when grounded in respect and empathy. Community members continued to share stories of that fateful rescue, reminding visitors and locals alike how a single act of courage could inspire an entire town to come together for the greater good. Now, it's your turn to be part of this continuing story of compassion and coexistence. If Benjamin's journey touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel so we can keep bringing you tales that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit and the unbreakable bond we share with nature. Together, we can make a difference, one story, one connection at a time.